I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next item is public comments. Does anybody wish to make a public comment? I know we have a number of people here for agenda items that we'll be calling on. Any public comments? Not? What are your wishes relative to the minutes? Please note the format. Supervisor Lemmer moves to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Chair Gibbs. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next, we'll jump to 6A2, approval of November claims and question cost. Those were sent out last week, or shortly after the first. What are your wishes? Chair Gibbs?
Make a motion to approve.
Move to approve the November claims and question costs. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Next is budget transfer, CCIT, CIP, ABC recurring accounts. We sure use a lot of
Alphabet.
acronyms.
We like acronyms, John. You want me to cover this? Yes.
You or Christie?
You have in your packet the transfers over and the highlighted ones. Jerry will explain what they need that for, but he had an outstanding of $39,011 in phone, and he's moving it to the video server upgrade account. When we go to Workday, we won't have to segregate these by year. Our old legacy system had each data set separately, but it would be a carry forward into his recurring account. And Jerry can explain what the amounts are for.
Thank you. When I submitted this request a while ago, it was a recurring request. We typically ask for recurring money to maintain our phone system, our camera systems, video and storage. Right now I have a big need to replace cameras, and I'm already used up almost all of the money that we have is set aside for camera replacement. This building has several hundred cameras in it. The jail, of course, has a lot of cameras, and one of the things we haven't touched very much is keeping up to date with replacing cameras in the jail. So we have a fairly large project that I'd like to do is replace about $50,000 worth of the jail cameras. Soon, we would get them under contract within the next couple of weeks. Basically focusing on a piece, working with Sandra, the jail administrator, having her identify which ones are the most critical ones. She has some security concerns because the cameras in the back are falling apart, basically. Some of them are losing resolution. Some of them are not in the right place anymore. So I'd like to transfer that money over. Basically, when it was requested to do phone maintenance and replace phone storage and replace phones, but I really need it for video, and I didn't want to do that without going through finance.
So just as a side note, I had a discussion with Christie earlier. In the past, we had the cover sheets that were associated with the transfers that gave some embellishment as to what they were, where they're working. That's a work in progress, and hopefully we will, as we transition to the new system, have that coming back in. So there's a little bit more clarification for us going forward. So we've had that discussion, and it's a work in progress. So are there any questions of either Christie or of Jerry? If not, is there a motion? Supervisor Hart.
I'll make a motion to approve the budget transfer.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Is there any discussion? If not, all is in favor of approving the budget transfer relative to CCIT for the KIP recurring accounts will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll take item B1 later in the agenda because we've got a number of people that are waiting. Is there anybody here on the digester online? Why don't we, I think that, why don't we, let's go to that. Consideration of requests of initial resolutions for conduit financing for digester projects. That's been approved by both the Environmental Resources Committee and the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, and is now before us as an initial resolution, not as a final resolution. I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've done a good job of procedurally laying out where we are, and that was really going to be my effort to do so today. It has gone through those committees that you referenced, both the Environmental Resources and the Extension Education Economic Development Committee. It was approved unanimously, I believe, from both to be moved forward for consideration by the board. The initial resolution is in the packet. I'll just do my best to characterize the conversation at Environmental Resources. Again, they moved the resolution forward, but as it was characterized, I think there are three approaches that the county ultimately can take with respect to the request that it received. The first is to approve the request to serve as the conduit issuer, and that first step, again, is the approval of the initial resolution. It does not bind you to a final resolution, but it allows that conversation, negotiation to continue. The second is to approve the issuer to proceed to receive financing through the Public Finance Authority, or PFA, as county approval is needed to do so. And the third option is to essentially do neither of those first two things, and that is to not support the project in its attempt to receive financing through either of those two venues. At ERC, Environmental Resources, the committee received information from the Department of Natural Resources, and that is in the recording, so I won't belabor the point, but they discussed a number of potential environmental impacts of the project for which the digester would support, and the opportunity that exists through the adoption of that initial resolution to allow for negotiation relative to concessions, for lack of a better term, from the developer to mitigate some of those potential risks. So that was the discussion that was had at Environmental Resources before that was moved forward. Similarly, at the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, again, that idea that through adoption of the initial resolution, you're allowing for the county board to essentially provide some parameters for negotiation for concessions or other things of value from that developer. In terms of additional information, just wanted to again say that, and it's within the initial resolution, it doesn't obligate the county to serve as the conduit issuer. The benefit from the developer, as I understand it, as was laid out at the full board meeting, it allows for the developer to start expending resources, spending money essentially, and they can, should the county reach an agreement to move forward as the conduit issuer, it allows them to recoup those expenses through that financing. So that's kind of the lay of the land procedurally. I don't believe anyone is on from the developer at this point, but you have had a number of presentations, and if you do have questions, Corp Counsel and I will do our best to answer those.
So are there questions? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe this is procedural, but have they been charged an application fee at this point for some of the work our staff has done at all? And will they be charged an application fee?
They have not been charged an application fee to this point. There is, through the initial resolution, the opportunity to put in place a schedule similar to what the Public Finance Authority has. whether it's for the initial review work or the ongoing annual review work. And I believe I shared an email to the full board with what the layout of that Public Finance Authority schedule looks like. But to this point, I don't believe any of the staff costs. I'm not aware of us charging a fee. I would hope to be aware of that. I also don't think that we've incurred any costs, and Corporation Counsel can elaborate on this, but I believe we have the developer is paying for all of the review that's taken place to this point by bond counsel, by our bond counsel.
That's correct. Our bond counsel, who we've used in the past, who is our typical bond counsel, has been retained by the county. They have a contractual and fiduciary relationship with us, but they are paid by the applicant. So we're not incurring costs associated with that legal review.
Supervisor Lemmer.
I think I'm still concerned that we don't have a policy in place before we agree to do this. I understand that this is an initial. If we were to pass this through the full board and negotiations don't benefit us the way we decide they need to, we do not have to go forward. Is that correct? Will there be a public hearing and comment to help shape what some of those requests are for this company should we decide we want to negotiate with them?
So I can answer, I think, both of those questions. So the first question as to whether this obligates the county to do anything moving forward, it does not. The initial resolution is a signal to, it's a notice to our constituents as well as the state government that we are looking into this, but it does not obligate us to act as the bond issuer or the conduit for the bonding. As far as the negotiation, my understanding of the process would be that it would come to the board for discussion of what the board is looking for as far as negotiation and specifically terms, and then any final resolution would also require approval by the board, which would include those terms if they were negotiated.
If I can add one other thing, I think your second question within it was inherently a question of what level of public engagement would the board have? Would there be the opportunity for the public to offer input relative to the potential concessions or potential benefit the county would like to see through that negotiation process? That is 100% a determination of the board. If you wanted to hold a public hearing to offer the opportunity for that input, we certainly can notice that. If you direct staff to engage with staff or elected leadership from the municipality in which the proposed development is designed to take place, we could do that as well. But that really is 100% within the purview of the board. The level of public input you want in that process is a decision, a policy decision for the board.
So I had a brief conversation with the administrator. I think that if the initial resolution is adopted, I think we should probably sit down and have a discussion about who's on first in terms of what are the issues relative to the Environmental Resources Committee, Extension, Education, Economic Development, and the HR, Finance, and Property. All have different roles to play in both. I think our role is to establish that policy, set the parameters of what our costs are. I think ERC has some of those. Do we have monitoring wells? Is there a liner to the manure pit? Are there other issues that we'd like to see? And then obviously there are job related and other aspects to it that EEDC would look at. But I think the first step is to start the process. We actually probably have more control over the project through this process than if we defer to the state and the PFA financing, and we can address some of those concerns. So I think step one is to start the process. Step two is to frame the process, and step three is to then implement an agreement, and if the agreement is not agreeable, there's no requirement that the county proceed. If that makes sense.
This is Supervisor Morash. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I agree with Supervisor Lemmer regarding not having a policy. We already have had another request for conduit bonding since receiving this one. My question is on page 9 with Exhibit A, notice to electors of Marathon County. Down at the end, it says take further notice that the electors of Marathon County may petition for a referendum on the question of the bond issue. Could someone please speak more on that, please?
Mike?
I certainly can try. So this comes from the statute that governs these types of bonds, 661103. Upon the issuing of an initial resolution, there's also a public notice that goes out indicating that the county has entered into this initial resolution. That triggers the ability of any elector of the county to petition for a referendum on the question of the bond issue. So if someone initiates that petition and follows the statutory requirements for it, the question of whether the county would enter into this role as conduit bonding would be submitted to the electors in a referendum. If no one does that in 30 days from the date of notice, then that doesn't go to the electors. So that's basically parroting the language of the statute. It's similar to other bonding situations. When the county's involved in bonding, there's typically an avenue for petitioners to request a referendum. I don't know if that helps or not.
Are there Supervisor or Chair Gibbs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had, and I thank the supervisor for bringing the item about as far as policy. There was discussed a little bit at ERC as far as a policy and developing of a policy. I think the one thing that I would say was, and the discussion centered around, well, what is the policy going to do? And are we going to go through a lot of work and develop a policy and we're not going to approve even going to stage 1 of the process? So I think that there would be two parallel tracks. If the board chose to go down, as the administrator laid out, the approval of the initial resolution, the policy would be developed coinciding with the items that we develop as far as moving forward and the negotiating. So the policy would be developed understanding these projects and these types of projects and what are the things that we'd want in that policy. So that would be, the policy would be developed consistent with and in at the same time as the negotiations are happening. So.
Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but additional context. I did, even today, have the opportunity to speak with a colleague from a neighboring county. Langlade County did, in fact, approve an initial resolution recently. So I don't know if that's helpful in that we could reach out to Langlade County to have similar conversations to see what they're thinking in terms of the generation of the policy, that has been alluded to. And in fact, the entity that Langlade County had received their request from relative to conduit issuing, and it's for the same type of project as this project, is in fact the entity that Supervisor Morash, I believe, just alluded to before, that we were contacted by a second entity interested in a very similar project. They are in fact the same entity. That second entity that contacted Marathon County is the same entity proceeding with the project in Langlade County.
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am not a fan of building the plane while we're flying it. I did that for the last few years of my previous job, and that was marginal enjoyment. But I feel like we shouldn't be rushing into something because the party that wants this has a deadline. So I want to be thoughtful with getting this policy as battened down as possible, because it does sound like we are going to continue to have this as a request. And so whether or not we approve this particular project, it's going to come in again. Maybe, Mr. Administrator, could you just then clarify, is that second request not anymore a request to us? They pulled it from us and they went to Langlade, or are they also looking for us to be a conduit?
No, it's the second of the two situations. They have, this entity, as I understand it, has a project in Langlade County, and they also have a proposed project that they'd like to pursue in Marathon County. The only reason, and I forwarded this email on to Chair Gibbs, their timeline for that initial resolution is not quite as short as the entity that came and presented to you. They're looking to get to receive some determination from the board in perhaps the first quarter of this coming year. So they are compiling the information, and then they plan on doing a very similar presentation as did the entity that came before you. I think it was last month, or actually September.
So eventually we will get another presentation and another project that we'll have to.
Absent them doing the first thing you said, which was pulling their proposal, yes, I would envision that you'd have a similar presentation about a very similar project in terms of ultimate desire, which is a manure digester. My understanding from speaking briefly with that second entity is that the operation itself is somewhat different, but the overall project is, again, the same. It's a manure digester renewable energy project.
Any other questions? Supervisor Art.
Thank you. One of my questions in all of this is, knowing that the requester has a deadline, what happens if we pass this initial resolution and then negotiations don't work out the way we do, and say a subsequent resolution doesn't pass the full board? Are we delaying this project then even more? I mean, or is it better to just either say yes or pass on this and then let them, because I know that there's other funding mechanisms that they were waiting on. So I just want to know where we were in that process, and are we passing something and then that could fall apart in the future and then delay this project?
Individuals are looking at me, so I'll do my best to answer, although I'm going to answer by saying I don't know that I'm competent to answer that question as to what the entity would prefer. One of the things that I do recall them saying is that if there's not a reasonable belief or a strong certainty that we'll find a way to the county would find a way to get to a place where they'd support the final resolution, then my sense is they would prefer to know that sooner rather than later. If, however, there's a good faith belief on our part that we will be able to adopt the policy, the guiding policy that the board needs, and then successfully negotiate terms that we believe we can reasonably assent to, then I think my sense is that they would support the idea of moving forward with the initial resolution. But I want to be very clear. I don't know that I'm competent to answer a question as to what they would prefer, what impact it's going to have on their project. They also made comments that they have private financing options available to them as well.
Any other questions? And I just a comment. I understand Supervisor Lemmer's concern over the lack of a policy, but I think that this is probably one of those cases where, as we go through, we probably can define it as we're learning it. It's hard to develop a policy if you've never done it before and if we don't have templates. But what I like about the process associated with the initial resolution is the ability to introduce some of the concerns that the residents and others have into the discussion that would be lacking under different funding scenarios. So I think it actually gives the county a little bit more of an ability to shape that project and address some of the local concerns under that, the initial resolution and subsequent negotiation process, and if we are not a party to that agreement.
This is Supervisor Morash.
Go ahead, Supervisor.
One more question, please. Thank you. Have we heard back from the DNR regarding water usage, how this would affect neighboring property owners with their wells?
Supervisor Marash, this is Administrator Leonard. I don't know if they provided exactly the information you're looking for, but at the Environmental Resources Committee, the DNR did have a number of experts from the DNR in various program areas. One of them was the high capacity well expert for this area of the Wisconsin, who talked about the process by which high capacity wells are permitted and some of the challenges with the topography of this area of the state, particularly where that current CAFO operation is located. They also had an expert from the DNR that is involved in the CAFO permitting process, the confined animal feeding operation permitting process, who talked through the considerations in that permit process. And as I understand it, the quantity available of groundwater is not a thing that is directly considered by the DNR when reviewing permits for CAFO operations. However, quality of groundwater is. So his presentation touched on those things. And then finally, they had an expert from the DNR that is involved in the review of engineering studies for purposes of manure digester projects. And my understanding of that is they don't permit, manure digesters are not specifically or discreetly permitted. They are considered part of, in this instance, they'd be considered part of the operation of the confined animal feeding operation, the CAFO, and would be reviewed, the engineering plans would be reviewed by DNR in that respect. So they had those three individuals provide information, and there was certainly information provided relative to available groundwater and the existing permit in terms of gallons, annual gallons that permit is issued for.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, the other, just to expand upon what the administrator mentioned, they were, the DNR clarified that they are permitted with 18 high-capacity wells with a volume capacity of, and I'm going to get the number wrong, but whatever the number was, and then they also provided historic usage of what the farm has utilized, and it was below significant, well, at 50, the maximum that they had reported usage of was around 50% of the licensed capacity of the wells that they have licensure for on the high capacity wells. So so they're licensed for a number, and the amount of actual usage going back to 2013 that's been reported by the farm to the DNR, because those wells are required to be licensed and report the usage, is at or below 50% of the amount of licensure.
Supervisor Hart.
Supervisor Morash.
Supervisor Hart first.
Thinking, and this question goes with the vein of, I think, Supervisor Marash's last question. And I wanted to know if in the ERC or the Triple ED committee, anybody from the Village of Maine was there and spoke on how the village feels about this project, because that's a very important thing when considering all of this.
Chair Gibbs, can you answer that?
Yes, so the Village of Maine administrator was at the ERC committee meeting. Now, it was also provided, the information was provided by staff from the zoning department. Village of Maine has their own zoning ordinance, but they have not adopted a animal confinement ordinance And so they have not adopted the county's ordinance. And so, but they did not provide any feedback. So because they have not adopted a ordinance, this would be a permitted use on the farm.
Supervisor
And they wouldn't have the ability to control it at this point, as they had not adopted anything under that.
President Marash.
Thank you. Having grown up in the country where we had a well and we had limited water in that well, we had to have hydrofracturing done in order to have enough water for just daily living. I'm very concerned about the surrounding property owners, because if this project has these extra wells and they're pulling all this water, it's going to affect possibly the water table and affect all these property owners and their well, and then they wouldn't be able to drill another one because there's not enough water. So that is a huge concern for me.
Any other questions? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we authorize and move to the full board the initial resolution.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? That motion carries, but it is not unanimous. I would, as a follow-up, or ask administration to work on assuming the county board adopts the initial resolution, begin working on formatting a policy and procedure that we would use relative to advancing these discussions in the future, and then also request that the other committees identify the issues and concerns before them, and potentially have it may be at some point in time we have a joint meeting with the various standing committees, but I would defer the chair as how to approach that. But I think we need to have a process and a policy in place in the near future to address the concerns that Supervisor Lemmer and Supervisor Marash and others have raised. So we'll now move on to the Regional Forensics Center project. Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, this resolution, I'm requesting from the HR Finance Committee to authorize the Morgue Task Force to utilize $4,230,000 of the Social Improvement Fund's balance to construct the Regional Forensic Science Center. The additional $4,230,000 is needed to receive the matching $7 million of state money that was awarded with the Wisconsin Building Commission's part of the state budget. So the county's portion, in order to get the $7 million, we have to come up with $7.8 million. The current construction estimate for the Regional Forensic Science Center is $14.8 million. So that we need to raise the $7.8 million, which the big part of that would be the $4,230,000 from the Social Improvement Fund. Besides the $7 million pledged from the state of Wisconsin, we're still waiting to hear from the federal government, as Senator Baldwin's office has issued a congressionally direct spending grant for $2 million to be used for the Forensic Science Center. The representatives of the Morgue Task Force and the staff have continued to seek outside funding. through other grants, securing approximately $1,170,000 in additional funding as of December 1st. North Central Technical College has expressed $400,000 in funding for IT equipment for this project. There are numerous other grants and applications that are out there at this time. Staff is directed to engage the State of Wisconsin Building Commission to authorize disbursement of the $7 million for this project. With the approval of this resolution, staff will be directed to release requests for bids for construction in January or February of 2024, not to exceed $14.8 million. This is essential to get bids out in January or February. If you go any longer, it's going to be more difficult to get bids, and most likely are going to be higher bids. The Morgue Task Force and staff will continue to fundraise to Are there any questions of me? So what I'm asking is authorize this so that we can have access to the $7 million for the state money, the grant money that we received, the $1,170,000. And we already have significant funds of the $2 million ARPA funds that we have utilized for design costs. So are there any questions? Comments?
Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed in the draft resolution, it talks about using some money from the Social Improvement Fund, and it seems to me when we were talking about the budget, we weren't really going to use that until we learned more about the finance or the role of the different fund balances and the kind of the consequences that could come with using them, the money from there. So I don't know. I feel like we're flip-flopping. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't know, Christy, if you want to, we did that presentation, and I don't know if this is responsive to your question. Certainly, the resolution, as Chair McEwen referenced, it segregates those funds for the purpose of securing the $7 million from the state to meet the timeline that the task force has really been pushing for, which is releasing bids in the first January and early February of this year. Absent doing that, the real question is what funds, if any, other funds would be utilized to do that? Because for a project to move forward, we need to have a funding plan in place, and Vice Chair McEwen's resolution lays out kind of that plan. I know when Christy did her analysis with Colleen, they identified, and I'm sure I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but a kind of initial thought as to what the unrestricted component of that fund balance was, and Christie's calculations, my recollection, are significantly higher than what this amount is that's being requested to essentially serve as that placeholder as additional fundraising continues. And just for additional context, I think Sarah, don't mean to put you on the spot, but she just handed out a number of pieces of information. This is the brochure we've been using as we've been doing our fundraising effort on the staff side. We have 71%, if you look at it in terms of overall project costs of the 14.8, 71% has been secured, for lack of a better term, between the $2 million from Marathon County, the $7 million from the State of Wisconsin Building Commission, the $1 million from a local foundation, and we have some other funds we've recently received. We also have, she's got the percentages. You want to kind of talk through the rest of the percentages?
Sure. So that's the funding that has been secured to this point. Of the 4.218 of the project that remains unfunded, currently 2.655 or just over $2.5 million is currently pending in applications. $2 million of that is the congressional directed spending dollars. that is being sponsored by Senator Baldwin's office. The other $655,000 are various grant applications that we have out with various foundations and organizations, both in Marathon County and surrounding counties. We do have another $275,000 of applications that are in process. Those are grant applications that Jessica and myself are currently working to finalize and then submit to other foundations for their consideration, which leads us with 9% of the project, or $1.288 million of funding that does not have an identified source at this point. There are other funding opportunities out there that we will continue to seek out. Many of those don't open until after the first of the year. We're kind of at the tail end of the fundraising cycle for many organizations where they have already allocated their dollars for 2023. And so there's many grant opportunities that open come the first of the year that we would certainly consider and look at applying for to further reduce that number.
Chair Gibbs.
A couple of points. So I just had a WCA meeting and also a NACO meeting last week. Had the opportunity to talk to the legislative director from NACO and then also the WCA legislative director that has worked with Senator Baldwin's office closely on the $2 million allocation of congressionally directed spending. And had a discussion with those as to the likelihood of the county receiving that $2 million. And I think the consensus is that as long as the federal government continues to just offer continuing resolutions on funding, that will not allow for the funding of the project. However, there's going to be a point in the very near future at some point that they're going to have to take up a budget or an omnibus bill. And once the omnibus bill or the budget is taken up, they were very confident that the $2 million of funding would be included in that kind of legislation. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, as the administrator spelled out and I think was clearly defined, was when the policy wasn't being followed, that the money roll over out of the social improvement fund. Had it been rolled over, it would have rolled into the CIP fund for future years. And so the amount that has been identified or that's being proposed in the in this resolution is just part of what will roll over under our current policy into CIP come after the 2023 audit is finalized, and so it would be available at that time. But it would be a potential increase over what we're potentially moving early now is what this would do. So again, I think it's still consistent with what the intent was, that those funds roll over under our policy. They would roll into the CIP after the audit. It's just we're pulling some of those dollars out now that have already been identified that would have been rolled over in the future and be available for 2025 CIP projects.
So I have a question from a logistics perspective. So the resolution calls for an up to. It's contingent upon the federal appropriation. It's contingent upon other grants. So how are our dollars tiered, or how will that work? Is the State Building Commission dollars after they match us dollar for dollar? So we have to have the money up front, or how does the timing work out? So is there a way for us to put our dollars last?
So I'll try to take that, and I preface this by saying, and I said this at Public Safety, I have not personally engaged with the Building Commission on this, but as the Vice Chair proposed the resolution, it directs staff to engage the Building Commission to seek the determination sufficient to authorize the disbursement of the $7 million in project funding. My initial understanding is that to receive the $7 million, it was written in such a way that said the county needed to have secured the remaining 7.8. My argument to the Building Commission, should this proceed through the board, is that that prerequisite has taken place and that the $7 million should be dispersed from the Building Commission. Of course, I can't speak for the Building Commission. We did deal with the Building Commission. The county did through a project at North Central Healthcare where we received $5 million for purposes of some of the renovations to offset costs with that project. I'm not sure that they will agree with my interpretation, but I think my initial read of their action that was taken in connection with the budget was that the county needed to demonstrate that that it had received or secured the remaining 7.8. I don't know if Corp Counsel, if you've looked at this or have a different opinion.
I don't have anything to add, unfortunately. I'm not any more educated than the administrator on that topic.
Christie?
I was taking a look. We did discuss the social services fund balance. I apologize. I thought it was in October. It was actually at the educational meeting of Finance Committee in September. And from that, it was determined that we would have from previous years, 2022 and previous, $6.32 million that could have been not restricted but available for CIP rollover or any other item. It is sitting in the Social Improvement Fund balance. And so the resolution that's before you today is then, in order for that to be moved to be this match, I don't know the words, but we would show that we have that money. That's why in the fiscal note, it shows that that money it segregates of that restricted account, $4,230,000 as social improvement fund, as committed social improvement fund balance. So we would reclassify it in the fund balance so that it was available to show that we have it committed. And at that point, again, once we understand what the requirements of the Building Commission are, we would then probably put that into the project to hold for them to make their commitment as well.
Supervisor Lemmer?
Okay, thank you for that. Just a quick follow-up. Help me figure this out. If we encumber or reserve this 4.23, whatever, and we don't use it all, it would just roll back over into the next 2-year KIP. Is that correct? Or, and then the second part of that question is, by taking this money out, are we putting ourselves in jeopardy in 2025? I mean, do you have projections on, or is this just a crystal ball question that nobody can really answer?
Right now, from this resolution, we are committing those funds to show to the Building Commission. I would assume, because with the last one that we had, we actually passed another resolution with the Building Commission. At that point, we would then roll what amount of that funds we would need into the capital improvement fund, so it's available in the right fund in the right place once that second resolution will be passed. And since it's in the CIP fund, what happens in CIP is those funds that are not used would then roll back into additional new projects for the CIP. So it would then theoretically stay within the CIP fund.
So the committee at its last meeting talked about trying to get a better understanding of all of our fund balance policies. And we were looking at what are the restrictions, what are the amounts, et cetera. I think that this discussion is sort of superseding or preempting an evaluation of a portion of the social improvement fund balance and making a determination that there were surpluses in previous years that were inappropriately categorized as restricted funds, which should not have been, and therefore should have been available for the capital improvement program. I know that there are some supervisors, based upon correspondence and discussions that I've had, that are concerned about not letting the process play out. I think the counter to that is that these are last resort dollars, but I think we still need to delve into that social improvement fund to determine what is appropriate restricted funds and what are the appropriate unrestricted funds relative to then rolling over into the capital improvement fund. So I think that we have not lost sight of that other discussion, the need to get a better understanding of our fund balances, making sure that our policies are consistently applied through all fund balances, or a rationale for the differences. Supervisor
Chair
Hart.
Robertson.
Supervisor Hart, and then was that Supervisor
Baker.
Supervisor Baker after Supervisor Hart?
Thank you. So my question is kind of this moving of funds, and I'm trying to create a flow chart in my mind right here of where these are going. So this money coming out of the social improvement fund, this is money that would otherwise be going to the CIP, or is this money that the money's already coming out to the CIP and then this is coming from the social improvement fund? I think that would make a big difference in my determination, because these are two departments that are very dear to me. So that's an important question for me.
And I think therein lies some of the need for us to evaluate our fund balance policy. Very clearly, general fund balance surplus rolls into the capital improvement program. So the 2023 dollars that are audited in the second quarter of 2024 are available for the 2025 budget. So you find out in April, May, June what those totals are. They roll over into the following year's capital budget. There's an assumption that policy applied to all fund balances. I think there's a lack of formal clarity of whether or not that does indeed happen. So I think one of the things that this committee and the county board needs to deal with is what is our formal policy relative to rollover of dollars. I think the concern here was that I think through 2017-ish, we were rolling those dollars, a portion of those surplus dollars into other funds and into the KIP. And after that, we stopped. We started designating all those as restricted, which led to a growth in the social improvement fund balance. And so we're now at that point of corrections. Supervisor Baker, and then Christie.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. So I have more of a comment than a question. So in 2019 was the year that we changed our financial report from the CAFR to just the audited report. And as I mentioned before, I would like the HR Finance Committee at some point to consider going back. But in 2019, we changed our CIP rollover policy, as far as I can tell, according to my research. I'm not going to claim that I understand everything that happened back then. But it looks to me, according to my research, that there were at least 3 fund balances that changed dramatically or changed substantially since 2019. So from 2019 to 2022, the county highway unrestricted fund balance went up by $13,879,000. The social improvement fund went up by $10,834,000. These are again from 2019 to 2022. And the employee benefit insurance went up by $2,048,000. And if you look at the prior policy statements, both in the 2014, I believe it was, policy statement, and in the policy statement that was listed in the CARF, the annual financial reports, between those two, all three of those funds at one point or the other qualified for the CIP rollover. So what I am suggesting that we consider, instead of taking the 4.23 million out of the improvement fund, that we split that among these three funds and take it out roughly proportional to the amount that those funds have went up in the last, since 2019. So that would be $2,200,000 from the unrestricted net position in the county highway fund, $1,700,000 from the social improvement fund, and $330,000 from the employee benefit net position. And that would, so we'd still have the same amount of money. We would be, setting it aside proportionate to the amount that those went up, which is, at least can be argued that's the amount that would have went into the CIP rollover in some fashion at some point. If we then, I would like to see that if we get more money and then we expect that money would revert back to those funds, but I could also go stay in the CIP balance, but I think that would be a more reasonable approach. We would not be taking out nearly as much out of the social improvement fund. I know there's been some question. I had asked a question about if we use that social improvement fund balance for social improvement, and there was even that, there were some restrictions. So I don't feel comfortable taking that much money out of the social improvement fund. I don't see why we should take it from one fund and not from other funds. So all three of those funds that went up 26 million in that time period between the three of them. So I would like to see that considered. Thank you.
Chrissy?
That's, each one of those funds has a different reason for being. So the property insurance fund, think of that as you run a big insurance company, and those funds don't roll into any other fund. They're there because we have a reserve. We have actuarial analysis on a calculation of what our accrued liabilities would be. And some of those claims don't come for a while, or if we're defending those through our insurance company, you may find that we need to pull it all the way through summary judgment or award or an appeal. And so those monies are out there for that fund. That one does have a separate policy on it, and that after we determine the outstanding claims and actuarially accrued claims, we have an outstanding unreserved policy, and 1/3 of that typically will go back into premiums for the next year. So because we're an insurance company to ourselves and we insure all of the departments, we then are able to offset in a good year, we are able to offset premiums for each of the department liability premiums in future years because it's ourself. So we aren't, I'm a good driver, so my company will give me a discount while we're all good drivers. And so instead of giving a little discount, we offset your premium in the future year. So that's why the insurance company wouldn't be one that we would use. The highway department itself has a fund balance policy, and all of these go back to the CIP policy and the working capital policy as well. They don't roll into the CIP formally. They would roll into highway reserve, which the highway itself, if you take a look at our CIP, has millions of dollars of which it does projects, including bituminous and their other ones. So we would not roll that for any other projects than the project they do themselves. And on the social improvement fund, we do roll that into the CIP after evaluation. And the policy is after evaluation of all funds that have levy support in them. And the calculation that we did do and we provided to you in September would have been similar to the calculation we would have done on an annual basis if we had done those for 19 through 2022. Therefore, the 6.3 million that was in the social improvement fund would be our estimate of what we would have rolled into capital improvement for those following years. Long explanation of why we would not, in most cases, take all three of those funds to roll them into CIP because they're each individually used and their fund balance or retained earnings are used appropriately for either its own capital projects contained within the highway. The insurance fund would be for outstanding liabilities or other claims that could occur or would be offset of premiums in future years. And the social improvement fund, if the calculation was done, would have been similar to what we presented in September, and those funds would roll into to the CIP, and in no cases would they be used for operations. They would not roll back into operations.
Chair Gibbs.
There's no question that Supervisor Baker's analysis is accurate, that in 2022, those numbers on those various funds did increase. The thing that needs to also, though, be brought into the discussion is that in 2022, during the 2023 budget discussion, 10 million plus of those dollar of reserves in the highway fund of the increase were used for projects in 2023. We just completed the 2024 budget, and we also spent out of the highway reserves an additional and allocated an additional $5 million. So to not take that into consideration and not say that the highway reserve account is up that significant amount when we clearly spent 10 plus million in 2023, or we will know what those numbers are when we finalize the 2023 audit. But we also allocated a significant portion of those of those highway reserve funds for 2024 projects.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, and I think this is a question that Christie could also answer. So out of that 6 million that's rolling into CIP, is this 4 million or so coming from that transfer over? Because for me, this is the difference between the CIP having a remaining balance of 4 million versus 8 million, and that's a big difference. And my overall interest here is keeping the social improvement fund well funded, because I view it as in every $500,000 of that is 1 year of a kid going to Lincoln Hills, because it's a $500,000 per kid, and I don't want to put the social services department in a situation in which they have to come to the board and ask us to find funding because they have a mandatory placement that they don't have funding for. That's kind of my overall question. I do believe that the social improvement fund, this is a project that it could be used for, but I want to keep the bottom line there, which is why I asked that question.
Christie.
I hope I answer this one right. So we are saying that if we would have done the calculations, there would have been up to 2022, 6.3 million that could have rolled. And we have maintained it in the social improvement fund. We are saying that that could have rolled into CIP and would have. Of that amount that would have been moved out already, or at least up into the 2024 CIP, we are going to take 4,230,000 of that and say this will be committed for this forensic science center project, and the other remaining difference would at this point is still in the social improvement fund.
Chair Gibb.
And also understand that that was the calculation up through 2022. So 2023 we will make whatever the new determination is as to the appropriate level of the social improvement fund balance. And if the 2 million that is estimated, as long as the fund doesn't fall below the restrictions on the others, which it hasn't at this point, that 2 million will roll into CIP plus any additional amount that's determined to be tax levy would also roll into CIP from the 2023 operations.
Any other questions?
Chair,
Chair, or
I have a
Supervisor
comment.
Baker?
So I would like to point out that I certainly did consider the $10 million that was budgeted for the highway fund last year, or this year. And I asked what the highway fund balance was going to be. And I was told that that number would not be available until, I believe, next March or April. So I used the best available data. I will repeat that I find it, pretty difficult to try to make decisions based on 1.5 year old data, which is what we're asked to do. So, I mean, if I can't get up-to-date data, then I'll have to use the data I have. And, at this point, that was the best data I had. So it's disingenuous to suggest that I'm just ignoring that when I asked for that and was refused to answer. Thank you.
All right, what are other questions? If not, what are your wishes? What are your wishes? Supervisor McEwen.
Before the motion, I'm not seconding, I'm not on the committee. I just, again, want to emphasize that the fundraising is going to continue for this. And my goal would be to reimburse that social improvement fund all the way. I can't guarantee that. There is money out there, and we have received a lot of positive responses from different funding areas that they said that they would, but they would have to wait till 2024. I don't know how much is going to go in there, but like I said, from what we received, positive feedback, our goal was not to have any tax levy money, no bonding, no loans. This program is set up to function at zero balance with no loan. So we're going to be getting a $15 million building for roughly $7.8 million. And like I said, it's important that this resolution passes, because if it doesn't, it's going to postpone this project. So thank you.
What are the wishes of the committee? Supervisor Lemmer.
I would move to forward the resolution to segregate the funds for the purposes of accessing the state of Wisconsin's funds for the construction of the Regional Forensic Science Center and directing staff to take action with respect to the future of construction of the RFSC to the full board.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. All right, we'll now move on to authorizing the Sheriff's Office participation in the Department of Natural Resources Boat Enforcement Enhancement Pilot Grant Program, as long as the sheriff doesn't drive the boat. Isn't that the issue before us? Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in a nutshell, the Sheriff's Office already participates in this program, and so it's really seeking to continue participation and looking to continue in that program with a new boat that has expanded capabilities to essentially reach any scene, because the current boats they have at their disposal are not able to get into certain areas. And so in those events, they're reliant upon the DNR to bring in boats that can get in there, and that's a time-sensitive sort of question or issue in terms of being able to respond to the scene. The boat under consideration, which is in the packet, It does meet DNR eligibility rules, and the cost associated with the boat is the lowest of the 3 quotes that we sought out per the procurement code. The grant program itself is a 5-year program, which hinges upon the county making the upfront purchase of the boat. And then each year over 5 years, you get a reimbursement rate that changes year to year. And that percentage from the DNR will range, essentially from 70 to 75%. And that the DNR explained hinges on participation in the program and available funding. But you can look, essentially if we move forward, we'll get the boat, for around 25 to 30% of the overall cost once those reimbursements come back through. The DNR has, at this stage anyway, has approved the boat as being eligible. They're aware of where we are in the process. They also recommended that we do it this year to get the boat into that 5-year reimbursement, right away. As far as the funding mechanism, I discussed this briefly with Chair Robinson. I included ARPA there as a starting point to get the resolution to committee and to the board, but obviously the ultimate funding mechanism for the grant or for this resolution is up to the committee to decide. If you have questions about the operations, I know the chief deputy is here as well. He can speak to that probably better than I can, but essentially it's a pretty straightforward program overall.
Are there questions? I just make a comment, and I've either corresponded or talked to a number of people. The concern that I have is that we're sitting here a month after we adopted the budget, and we're dealing with a capital improvement project. I know there's a desire to accelerate that and to have it come out of the 2023 budget, but 24. I think this is a case where the project was lost due to a retirement of staff and other things, but it really begs to the need for that 5-year capital plan, and I'm going to take this opportunity to reiterate how important that is so we have a longer-term view of what the demands are on the county and what the upcoming projects are. So I would hope that we could, I know it's difficult sometimes to look for what the long-term needs are, but it would be, I think, helpful to the county board from a budgeting perspective and priority perspective to get that in place. So other questions relative to this proposal? My understanding in talking to Christy is that the numbers in here are subject to potential change based upon our grant fund. The 48,000.
Yes, the county's done these boat, snowmobile, DNR grants, ATV in the grants. And so what we used to do is in the legacy system, we would put it in the CIP and we would purchase the equipment, and then the state would pay us back on an annual basis. With our current system now, we will use our grant fund. We will post a grant receivable for the state. We will pay for the equipment, and then we will have them submit the reimbursements to us. And the ARPA would be used for the county's share of that, which is about 20% of the total value, 25-30%. So that's why we have up to, because we wanted to make sure that we could purchase the piece of equipment and get the ball rolling with the DNR.
Is the 48,000 based on what percent?
The 48,137, I believe it is, that is the total price of the boat. There is a document, and I can't remember what the calculation, I would say roughly 38,000-ish, I believe, was the estimated reimbursement over the 5-year. Don't quote me exactly, but right in that ballpark. That's based on the low of around 70% reimbursement.
So is the resolution correct in the 48,137, or should that be a lower number?
It should say up to the amount, because we want to make sure that we purchase the boat and do that. So what they would do is they'd go ahead, get what the piece of equipment, finalize the grant agreement, and then we would just roll the remaining amount back to the ARPA fund.
And by
It's a
Excel,
little different than we usually do because we would just take it from CIP, and then each year we would reimburse the CIP from the DNR amount, and that's because that's how our legacy system worked. We would do each data set, but now with the grant, we can put it in there right away and have it ready for every year when the reimbursement comes to us.
so I know that when we had a different topic before us relative to the use of ARPA dollars for loans, that we were subject to that 2026 limitation. So
We
we
would
would
only
have-
use it for the total amount we would need for the purchase. And then no more, we wouldn't have to take all the money out of the ARPA and then put it back. We're going to purchase it through the grant program, use the county's match for when we pay the bill and write the check out. That would be well before the end of next year. And then we would be reimbursed by the state for the amount that they agreed upon.
Chair Gibbs. Okay.
I was just going to say, we're really effectively going to put in an accounts receivable for the remainder of the grants in the future years.
Correct.
Bill, any comments or introductions?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to just introduce some of the people who are doing the work day in and day out in the recreational safety end of our enforcement. And they also work with Jamie Polly's crew at Parks and Rec. So we have Deputy Brian Madreski, Deputy Tyler Bremer, Lieutenant Mike Van Offeren, and then Captain Burkholder in the back. So if there's any questions that you may have specific to the programs, they are the ones that are out enforcing, and the parks enforcement, snowmobile, ATV, boat, and many other things as well. So they're out and about all the time. I know that time is of the essence for your committee, but if anybody has any questions to the actual operations, what they do day in and day out, they are here.
Any questions? If not, this was approved by Public Safety yesterday. It is now before us. What are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to authorize the boat procurement with ARPA funds pursuant to the DNR Boat Enforcement Patrol Grant Program and move to the full board for its consideration.
There a second? Seconded by Supervisor Limmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Approving an amendment to the 2023 and 24 budgets accepting Wisconsin Lead Safe Homes Program Grant. Laura, are you the?
Yes, so that's a health department program. We in your packet you have the information about the Lead Safe Homes Program grant. This is a grant that is provided to us through the State of Wisconsin Department of Health Services, and it supports and enhances the health department's required lead intervention and abatement activities. The health department follows DHS 254 on all lead mitigation testing and activities. In cases where a child has a blood level over the state level, which is 5 micrograms per deciliter of blood or higher, they are referred to us, and we are required as the health department to do a lead investigation and work with the families or property owners on lead abatement. So just a quick note about lead. Lead is a health hazard. There is no safe level of lead in children in the blood. Even low levels of lead in the blood have been shown to have affect learning, overall IQ, a child's ability to pay attention, academic achievement, and long-term harm. Exposure to lead can seriously harm a child's health and cause well-documented adverse effects, including damage to the brain and nervous system, slowed growth and development, learning and behavior problems, hearing and speech problems. So this grant is for $15,600. And again, it would enhance and support our existing lead intervention and abatement activities. Description of those activities is on the backside of the description of the grant itself. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Any questions? If not, what are the wishes of the committee? Supervisor Hart.
I will move to approve the amendment to the 2023 and 2024 budget, accepting Wisconsin Lead Safe Program, Safe Home Program grants.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Resolution authorizing, or excuse me, amending the 2024 budget resolution language pursuant to the Department of Revenue request. Lance or Christie, who's taking the lead? And Christie?
Yep, this one is on me. We submit the county's levy limit to the DNR, and we provided it through the
DOR?
DOR.
DOR, DNR, one of them. One of them.
We submitted it.
That's our problem. That's
The resolution went through. The numbers are great. The DOR said we needed to add a sentence for the operating levy. And we said, how do we do that? They said, county board passes a change in the language to add that. Let us know, and you will be A-OK. And so that is essentially what we're doing. We're asking you to please add the language as required, specifically by the DOR. And I'll submit it, and that will be the end.
In essence, we need to do this because the property tax bills have been prepared and sent to most of the communities in the county based upon what our assumption was that we had done right, but DOR said we
Yep.
need to do it
Yep,
differently.
and the numbers are right. They're happy with that. They said, please put this language in because that will make them happy.
Is this a Scribner's correction, or is it I'm looking to Cor.
We approached that question with DOR, but they indicated statutorily it does require a separate action of the board by majority vote. So that's why we prepared this resolution. I did confirm that they're satisfied with the language of the resolution so that we won't have to do this for a third time.
Are there any questions? Chair Gibbs.
So I guess the only question that I would have is, you know, the repercussions if we choose not to, and that is how the DOR fixes that, and they would adjust our shared revenue by that same 190,000 come next year. So we still would be then we would be short the 190,000 for a budget.
Correct. So it was the previous year's unused, and we make an adjustment for that. They need specific language using that phrase, and that would be what we're doing today. And the ramifications is they don't affect anything on the budget. They would short your shared revenue, and in essence, you have a little bit more on one end, and you'll get a little bit less on the other end. So this will clean that language up, and we'll submit it and be set.
Any other questions? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Make a motion to approve the amending of the 2024 budget resolution language pursuant to the Department of Revenue's request and move to the full board for consideration.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the resolution, the budget resolution will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Reserving the right to go back to the budget process, we're going to jump on to 7A, an update on the administrator and revisions to McDevco, Marathon County revolving loan memorandum of understanding. So,
I know you have additional items. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll be rather brief as I kick this off, and we'll answer as many questions as you want. But in your packet is a resolution from 2018 that at the time Marathon County was approached by a foundation with some thought to allocate funds for the development of a revolving loan fund and have McDevco, the Marathon County Development Corporation, administer that fund. And ultimately, the county board did that. They allocated $1 million. The private entity and allocated $1 million, and McDevco has been doing that. Pursuant to that resolution, you'll see that at the end there's a now therefore be it resolved, directing my predecessor, the administrator at the time, to negotiate an MOU with McDevco to do so. And that was done. That memorandum of understanding is set to expire at the end of this year. So Kim approached me to look at that and update it. And I just wanted to let you know, it's here for education. There's no action needed. But we did, I think, make, from my perspective, a couple of important changes that I wanted to inform this committee of, and we actually informed Extension, Education, Economic Development of that last week. So from my perspective, there were 3 important modifications. One is the gap percentage increasing from 20% to 40%. So what that alludes to is the fact that McDevco very frequently through the revolving loan fund, well, at least historically, all of the time, was partnering with a local lender to allocate funds. And that gap percentage was the amount of funding that could be provided for McDevco, by McDevco. So that percentage is increasing from 20 to 40%. And I have the privilege of serving on another very similar entity on their board. I can tell you that that body has adopted similar changes. Kim can talk to you kind of through the logic of why that request was made by the McDevco board and is supported by the McDevco board. It's also consistent with the City of Wausau's revolving loan fund policy. But that was change number 1. Change number 2 is the development of a micro loan fund using these same funds. And a micro loan fund is just that. It's a smaller loan where McDevco can serve as the sole lender. Again, I think there's a lot of sound logic behind that, but that was change number 2. And then change number 3 was within the existing policy, there was not a requirement that the members appointed to the Marathon County Revolving Loan Fund Loan Committee, so the committee that would review those financing requests, there was no requirement that one of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors members from the McDevco board serve on that loan committee. It was certainly not prohibited, but it was not required. I asked for a change to require that the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, one of the members that were appointed by the Board of Supervisors to the McDevco board, serve on the Revolving Loan Committee, the Marathon County Revolving Loan Committee, and the newly created Micro Loan Committee. My thought process was simple. Make sure that there's a direct tie back to the Marathon County Board, the policy board, the Board of Supervisors, when those funds were being discussed and allocated. So those were the 3 big changes from my perspective. I don't know, Kim, I can provide you a microphone if you have anything else you wanted to add, or if anyone from the committee has questions about McDevco or the revolving loan fund. Kim gives updates every month to the Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee about the loans that are expended through that fund and a lot of the other work that McDevco does, but I just wanted to make the committee aware of those changes. Go ahead, Kim, if you have anything else.
I think you covered it perfectly. The whole idea is just to make capital a little bit more accessible to businesses in a very uncertain time, and especially with rising interest rates. So we're able to offer a fixed rate solution and take some of that equity burden away for the banks to get projects to launch sooner rather than later, and ensure that business owners feel supported.
Are there any questions of Kim or of Lance? Thank you for that update. All right, we'll go back to 6B1, review of the budget process. And we talked about it last time, and we were a little bit hard pressed for time, but I wanted again to just see if the committee members had any thoughts on the budget process improvements we could make. The Rules Review Committee is looking at it. The Executive Committee is talking about the budget process tomorrow. And again, this year, we made some changes relative to, both the budgeting 101, talking about budget priorities, expectations, or assumptions, and committee involvement. Any thoughts from this committee relative to the budget process as we move forward, because it may be coming back as part of the rules review process if there are timelines or other things you'd like to see changed. Any thoughts? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's really important for me personally to understand those fund balances, where the money comes from, how it's stored, how it's spent, how it's perceived by the taxpayer, and then what the ramifications are for using the funding or changing the funding, because one thing I've learned about this budget process is it's a big old meatball. And I just need more time. And visuals would be helpful for the visual learner I am.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the things that was, I think, pretty evident is having the direct involvement of the standing committees earlier in the process and getting their feedback on potential changes or changing in policy and how that would change and impact the budget was critical to what ended up being a much smoother process in the end. I applaud at the opportunity to make those changes. I think there's still, the ultimate challenge really becomes, obviously there's a request or possibly the desire to have that even increased or earlier in the process, provide that information. The challenge becomes obviously when the funding partners, some of those funding partners are the state and estimates are sales tax. We've got to keep in mind that those numbers we don't get until sometimes late, as we found out pretty evident was we made that change to the budget right after the budget was originally sent to us or accepted by this committee. We found out the highway funding from the state was different than what we had anticipated. So I understand the desire to have it earlier, but I also understand the restrictions that we have. But I think the process and getting the committees involved and the education that was provided to the committees earlier really made the process much better.
Other thoughts and comments? Other thoughts? I know it continued. It was a tough year given the implementation of the new software packages, but I'm hoping that as a result, we'll have better financials on which to base the budget, and the county board will have that information going forward. And I think to address Supervisor Lemmer's concern, I think we are trying to get our arms around that fund balance policy. And I think one of the hopes and expectations that I would have is when the audit is presented, I think it's important for us to get into the fund balance policy and our guidelines in January so that drives the audit. And then at the time of the audit, we can have a better discussion of what those numbers mean. But I think it's really imperative that we get the discussion on the fund balances done early. So if there are changes, Christy can work with Baker Tilly in incorporating those into our audited statements. And I think, Christy.
And just one item, I know we've been working on getting our, we took our legacy system and we have to roll it in, and we just had a meeting where we have taken those balances and rolled them in a sandbox. We have 13 errors out of probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 lines of code. So we're going to clean those up, and once that's done, that's what we're really waiting for, to get you some nice trial balances and stuff to get you some of the information. So we're really, really close on that. Just wanted to give you that update. We've been working really hard on that. So it's getting close. So once we get that, we'll get a lot of that out for you as well. So not only do you need that, I'm looking forward to it too. And that was a lot of hard work on the part of the staff and IT department. So have those shortly.
All right, anything else in the budget? If not, do you have ideas for future meetings, understanding that we will, I know Lance has worked with CPZ to develop a list of our county properties, so we'll be talking about our surplus property or the property issues. We'll be talking about fund balance policies. We'll be talking about what our policy is relative to participation in the initial resolutions and policies relative to private sector funding. I know that there are some issues relative to health insurance that Supervisor Marshall wants us to continue to look at. Other issues going forward? And we have our committee work plan. All right, we will forego our December 26th meeting unless somebody feels compelled to come. I think, will we be open?
Yes. No, we're not open.
So you will be the only person standing outside. You are welcome to do so. Otherwise, we will meet on January 6th or January 10th. Is there a motion to adjourn? Supervisor Hart, second by Chair Gibbs. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned.